yesterday came suddenly.
All right, welcome to the Young Turks. I'm excited about today's show. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have depressing stories today. The stories on the financial bailout situation are depressing. And I wish I had better news for you. I don't, but I got to keep it real. I got to tell you how it is. And of course, as usual, we have good news, bad news, and the public option. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. And how badly our government is captured by corporate interests is, like, I really did not have a good sense of how deep that capture was until the last, let's just say, year to 2 years, to be honest with you. And it doesn't look like we're heading in the right direction, or right enough direction. All right, so we'll get to that depressing stuff in a second, but I'm going to start with something fun. And later, to make up for everything, in the third hour, we have boobs. We have boobs. And the two really fun stories about women's breasts. So, look, are we not merciful? Okay, we depress you a little bit, and then we pick you back up. All right, so let's start with fun, though. And I go up and down on my reaction to the Glenn Beck stories, right? Sometimes I get sick of them. I'm like, wait, this guy's a lunatic. What are we doing covering his lunatic, drivel? Then other times I have so much fun when he misspells the words, and he's just such an idiot. It's fun to look at. It's a kind of a fun train wreck. And he's a little dangerous and has some real consequences in the world, whether it's the lunatics that are following him and doing some damage in the world, or he gets people like Van Jones fired, right? Today is one of those days where I think, this is fun. Now, he went and talked to Katie Couric on her new web show. And I got to give Katie Couric credit here, man. When she latches onto a question and she feels it has not been answered, she's going to come coming at you, okay? She's not playing. And that's journalism. That's good journalism. You keep on asking and see if that idiot is ever going to have an answer for it. You want to know what I'm talking about? Get a load of this answer that Glenn Beck has on the white culture question. This is awesome. Let's watch.
Twitter question is, Adrian from Florida said, what do you mean by white culture?
I don't know.
You said he had a deep-seated hatred for the white culture. What is that? What is the white culture?
Gosh, I'm so tempted to help make news here today.
Well, no, I'm just curious. This was actually Adrian from Florida.
What to do? Adrian, go to glennbeck.com, listen to it. You can hear all of it.
No, but you didn't really address white culture, I think, in your explanation about President Obama. I haven't seen the whole show, but can you just, for our purposes...
Just for your purposes?
Yeah.
Well, this will be a little secret between us?
No, for this show. Can you explain what you mean by the white culture? Because some people might say that sounds kind of racist.
Really? It's amazing to me that for the first time, I think, in history, somebody can ask a question and say, don't you think that maybe we have several pieces here? We have several pieces. George Bush says, my grandmother was a typical African American that had her views bred into her. You don't think maybe we would ask questions about that comment? How is it that the first time, I think in history you should check on it, somebody says, hey, there's some red flags here maybe we should look at, has become the target? How am I the target for asking questions?
People just want to know, what is white culture?
I love it.
I'm going to see if I can play your game. People just want to know.
Well, Adrian wants to know.
That's good for Adrian.
No, but I mean, it's fine. If you make a statement, though, shouldn't you be able to defend exactly what you mean by it?
Katie, how many times have you said something where you're like, I didn't think, what's the white culture? I don't know, what's the white culture? What is the white culture? I don't know how to answer that. That's not a trap.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not trying to trap you. I think people wanted to know what that meant exactly.
Well, we know Adrian does.
Yeah, and you're not going to answer her?
I'm not going to get into your soundbite
Well,
gotcha
no,
game,
we're-
which
we're-
we already are.
No,
We
no,
already
no.
are.
We're actually, this is completely unedited. So if you felt like you wanted to explain it, you have all the time in the world. No? Don't want to go there?
Oh, man. That is nicely done, Kirk. Man, she got a hold of his ankle. It's like, she was not going to let it go. Let me tell you this for the 8th time. So what the hell do you mean by white culture? Now, you see, if you think that you screwed up, you didn't mean to say white culture, you meant to say something else, just explain it. Or you meant it, then okay, then you have a good reason for meaning it. Tell us what you meant. It's not a hard question. And she's not trying to trap you. You said it. And look, you either screwed up, which happens from time to time. I mean, if you say you want to, she said, sometimes you misspeak. It's entirely possible. I misspeak all the time. So clarify it. Oh, that was awesomely awkward how he didn't want to answer that question, because we know what the answer is, and that's why he doesn't want to answer it. Then he says, how am I the target for just asking questions? I mean, have you stopped beating your wife recently? I'm just asking. Oh, that's all I'm doing. I'm asking. Have you stopped punching your mom in the face? I'm just asking a question. That's all I'm doing. And then he's like, and he seems to be dumbfounded. But get a load of that conflict there. He says, on the one hand, he doesn't understand why it's an important question that he should answer. And on the other hand, he seems like he's befuddled by the white culture equals racist. Wait a minute, how can you be befuddled by that if it has nothing to do with racism? Why don't you just answer the question? What are you hesitating for? Because you're worried that it does sound racist, and you don't want to get caught in a trap of sounding racist because you already said that and you have no explanation for it. I mean, look, I'm telling you things you know, okay? That was bad, man. That looks terrible. And because at the end of it, I think if you meant something else by white culture, and I swear to you have an open mind on what he meant by it, and I was actually looking forward to, the first time I watched that, looking forward to what his explanation might be. Well, if you have no explanation, that means you meant it in the bad way, right? And you just don't want to say, and now I see you. I see you. And the funny thing is, after all that we've done on Beck, I never thought he was racist. I don't know, maybe I'm being a clown, but I never thought, I think he's doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't, he doesn't think through his ideas. And I'm not even sure I think he's a racist now. I think he's just blurting out things, and he thought that would probably make his conservative audience happy. Like, oh yeah, he's against white culture. And then, so when asked about it, he never put any thought behind it, so he doesn't know how to answer it, right? But for the first time, I look at that and I go, that's at least racially questionable, right? Now, JR, am I being a little naive there and not thinking that Beck was racist? Because he's just such a clown that I'm not sure he even knows what he's saying.
Well, I guess it depends on, if what we say racist is, or if it's just he's pitting two races against each other. He's maybe afraid of what he's saying now. A African-American dude in power, President of the United States. What does this mean for me and other white people like me? Oh my God, they want revenge. I don't know if that's racist or if that's paranoia.
I hear you. It's that subtle prejudice we were talking about.
Yeah,
before.
so he's pitting the two races against each other because he doesn't think that there's such thing as people getting along.
Now, and it's his assumptions. Like Bush said the other day with I was in prison ministry, and of course they were all black, right? And what Beck said about Obama being colorless that we talked about, I think it might have been yesterday as well. Now, he said that earlier during the campaign. He's like, well, he doesn't really act black, so he must be white. Because in his mind, the assumption is white is normal. So if you ask Glenn Beck, he probably would genuinely think, I'm not racist at all. What are you talking about? You're crazy. No, I don't hate black people. But what I think he doesn't even realize is that he has all these assumptions about black people that are not positive, right? And so, and that's the subtle prejudice, to be polite, that we're talking about here. And that was certainly exposed by Katie Couric there. And I loved her answer to the soundbite thing. She's like, yeah, that's a nice way of trying to deflect, but you got all the time in the world, son. Go ahead. Open mic. Go for it. All right. Now, since I had so much fun with that, I want to do one more Beck with Couric, because now all of a sudden I think Couric's like an excellent interviewer. Because remember what one of my top complaints about TV reporters or interviewers is that they don't ask follow-up questions. The producer gives them questions and they just read the questions, right? And they are not listening to what the person is saying to ask follow-up questions. You can't blame Katie Couric for doing that. So I'm beginning to think she's one of the best interviewers on television. Okay, so now let's go to Glenn Beck's theories on what a liberal means and why he might have been a liberal before. Oh, this ought to be a doozy. Number 4.
How would you say you're more conservative than liberal?
Yeah. I used to be a real social liberal, but that's only because, I don't mean to offend anybody here, but what the heck, I will anyway. I was an alcoholic. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I think I was more of a liberal, not for any thought process other than I just wanted to keep my options on the table. You know what I mean? Just keep everything out there. So, hey, that's cool. I'm cool with that. When I sobered up, I started looking at all of the things that I believed in and decided to take everything out and only put the things back in me that I knew to be true.
I'm trying to understand the liberal alcoholism analogy.
See, it's liberals don't understand that. I think they're all, no.
No, explain it, because some people might be scratching their heads and saying,
socially liberal, being able to keep absolutely everything on the table, being able to say, no, there's nothing wrong with that, and it doesn't hurt society here, and it doesn't hurt society there, I think is an easy way to live your life.
So you think people who are socially liberal make excuses for bad behavior? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think some do, not all.
Mm-hmm. Because some people might say they want to allow people to do things, and that in a weird way, government shouldn't necessarily be involved.
No, see, now here's the difference. This is why I'm libertarian. I don't want a government telling me what you can do and what I can do. What your choices are, those are your choices. I'm not going to regulate what your choices are. You want to eat all health food? That's fine. I want to eat all Doritos? That's fine. But the consequences fall on you and fall on me. That's the libertarian in me.
But a social liberal may say the government shouldn't be involved in reproductive rights for women.
I don't think they should. Except for if you're talking about abortion, let's look at abortion as the rights of the child. I happen to believe it's a child. Some people don't. Some people in the administration are kind of queasy on when anything becomes a human, even after birth. I happen to believe it's a child.
So you think abortion should be illegal?
Yes.
He's totally full of crap. He's not a libertarian at all. He just says that to try to appear nonpartisan, which is a goddamn joke. Okay. No, I've seen clips of this. One of our listeners put it together. We showed it in our post-game show, where he's like, "Oh, I'm a libertarian, except I don't want you to smoke pot. I want to prohibit you from getting married to who you want to get married to. I don't want to give you choice in how you deal with your body in terms of abortion. In other words, I'm a complete conservative, and I'm just libertarian on the things that conservatives are libertarian on. But I'll call myself a libertarian to pretend that I'm not biased." That's none of those things are libertarian positions. Not even close. No, he's like, no, I don't want people in my life. But do I want to get into other people's life? Oh, of course I do. No, I want to tell them they can't do this and they can't do that. And even the most intimate things. You mean, as a libertarian, you want to get between a woman and her doctor? You're not telling me that, are you? Now, look, I get what he's saying, that he thinks it's a child. And that's a legitimate point of view. For the pro-life position to have that point of view, I get it. But it's a conservative position. It's not a libertarian position. Okay, but let's get to the juicy stuff. Oh, by the way, before we do that, and he said, and people in this administration, they're, I guess, for abortion, the way he stated it, but then also want to do harm to the children after birth. What the hell was that about? Yeah, they're looking to kill the kids after they're born. Based on what? He just throws things out there like that. That's so inflammatory and based on absolutely nothing. They don't have good intent. These conservatives, they're off the deep end, man. All right, anyway, now on the liberal stuff, I'm 50-50 on that, right? He says, liberals, I was a liberal back when I was an alcoholic because, I did bad things. Now, you could look at it that way and say that's a hideous way of looking at it. And again, it goes to the assumptions that are in Glenn Beck's head. liberals behave badly, they're drunks, they're this, even though he's a drunk and he's conservative, right? But nonetheless, projection. Oh, liberals must be the drunks. They must be the ones behaving badly, right? But the flip side to that is, I understand what he means. Like, liberals are more socially open. That doesn't mean they behave badly. But he's conflating those two things. And if he made the second point, it would be fairer. But he's not. He makes the first point and is. But he's not alone there. I think a lot of conservatives think, oh yeah, those liberals, yeah, they're loose, they're sluts. But that the studies that show that in the conservative states, women have even more sex before marriage. The only thing he said there that was true is in the beginning he said, back then I didn't have a thought process. Yeah, that still holds kind of true, Glenn. All right. We got to take a break here. We're going to come back with Congressman Rob Andrews, find out what the latest on the health care reform bill is from Congress. That should be interesting. Young Turks. All right, back on the Young Turks. Now joining us is Congressman Rob Andrews. He's from the 1st District of New Jersey. He's a Democrat in the United States Congress. Congressman Andrews, thank you for joining us on the Young Turks.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
We appreciate your time. So, of course, today is a big day in Congress. A lot of back and forth on whether the public option is going to succeed in the final version of the health care reform bill in the House. And there are reports out that the Blue Dogs are wavering a little bit and that the Progressive Caucus has the upper hand, and it looks like that they might win the day and include the public option in the bill. Now, those are the reports, but I want to ask you, you're there yourself. Is that the same feeling you have from Congress?
Yes, I do. I think the public option, a strong public option, will and should be in the bill that we pass. And I think that those of us who share that view are gaining the upper hand.
And how about yourself? Are you, obviously you're pro-public option, as you just stated, but would you vote no on a bill, a final bill, not the House bill, but after it's been put together with the Senate, that does not have a public option?
I'm not prepared to say that. My objectives here are twofold. They're to bring the cost explosion under control for insured people and to get uninsured people coverage. If we pass a bill that does that, I'm going to vote for it. But I believe the best way to do that's the public option. And I'm fighting for it and going to do whatever I can to make sure it's in the final bill.
Now, Rahm Emanuel came out today and said that he doesn't believe it's likely that the Senate will pass one with a public option. So if the House passes one with a strong public option, as it appears now, for the moment being, how do you reconcile that? I mean, you have two positions that are against each other.
That's why we have negotiations. That's why we have a conference committee. But it's ironic you use the word reconcile. One of the options for the Senate is to pass health care reform under what's called a reconciliation bill, which would require only 50 votes and not 60. And I feel pretty certain if they followed that procedure, there would be a strong public option in the Senate bill as well as the House bill. Now, so the people say, well, that's not fair. It's out of the ordinary. That it's a sneaky way to do it. That's absolutely false. Every major piece of economic legislation since Reagan has been passed by that procedure in the Senate. The Reagan tax cuts, the Clinton economic plan, George W. Bush's tax cuts in 2001 and 2003, all passed by reconciliation. This should too.
Now, there's, of course, another option as well that they say, you know what, we need all the Democrats or people in the Democratic caucus in the Senate to vote with us against a Republican filibuster, and then you could vote against the bill.
That's true.
Like.
Yeah, that's also very true, and I think that's a reasonable option for some of the Senate Democrats who may be uncomfortable with this. I think every member has an obligation to vote his or her best judgment, but I think that every Democrat has an obligation to permit the party's position to come to a vote. It's one thing to not vote for something. It's quite another to be part of an obstructionist effort to prohibit it from coming up for a vote.
I know the Republicans, when they were in charge, emphasized the phrase up and down vote, up and down vote. Shouldn't we at least get an up and down vote on the president's most important legislative agenda item?
Sure we should. And I think anyone who believes it's the wrong way to go should vote their conscience and vote that way. But to deprive the country of a straight up-down vote, as you say, on his plan, I think is pretty irresponsible.
Now, that's the ideal. But let's say, as is very likely, that we don't get the ideal. And the Senate version has a trigger in it. And you go into committee and it comes out with a trigger. Do you vote no on that bill?
Again, I'm not going to say that I would, because I want to get this plan passed. I would strongly not like to see that in there. And I'm going to do whatever I can to argue that that's the case. But I think in any negotiation, painting yourself into a corner is a mistake. I would look at a trigger very negatively. I don't think it would work. But I don't think that we should be painting ourselves into a corner.
Frankly, Congressman Andrews, I don't understand the point of the trigger. It says if the insurance companies have not lowered costs, X number of years down the road, let's say 5 years, then we will do health care reform. Well, are we doing health care reform now?
I'd be okay if the trigger started in 2004 because basically they've had market competition since 2004. It hasn't worked. And I don't believe it would work either. I think all the trigger really does is delay the inevitable and, frankly, put the American people through 5 more years of exploding health care costs where they're at the mercy of the insurance industry. I don't think it works.
Let me ask a technical question about that. What does it mean to trigger? I mean, it's not going to be automatic, is it, that they don't meet a certain number?
Well, since I'm not for it, I wouldn't put words in the mouth of people who are. But what I've heard them say is that if healthcare inflation exceeds a certain number, then the public option would come into existence. And I assume they would pick a number a little bit above the rate of inflation. Right now healthcare costs, premium costs go up 11% per year. So if you set the trigger at 6 or 7, it would trigger pretty quickly. But, I think rather than get lost in the minutiae of all this, you got to come down to basic facts. In 96% of the insurance markets in this country, 2 companies, maybe 3, sometimes 1, have domination over that market. They do not compete with each other because they don't have to. They're not subject to the antitrust laws, so they don't. And the consumer pays more, gets less, and very often gets the short end of the stick. I think unless you are guaranteed another competitor in that marketplace, which the public option does, that's not going to change.
So if the public option does the job and it lowers costs, theoretically the Blue Dog Democrats and theoretically the Republicans should actually be in favor of it because it's fiscal discipline. Now the trigger doesn't seem to do the job because it just kicks the can down the road. But if we don't have the public option, you say you're still open to the possibility of voting for it.
Yeah, because I believe there are some other ways you control costs. For example.
Exactly. So what is that?
For example, we have in the bill a provision that says that insurance companies cannot spend less than 85% of what they take in to pay doctors and hospitals. That means they can only have overhead and profit of 15%. Today it's about 30%. If you found a mechanism to enforce that rule, it would have the effect of reducing costs. That's number one. Number two is that if there were some competitor for a insurance industry, like the credit unions are competitors for banks, as long as that competitor could build a provider network of hospitals and doctors, it might work. Again, I don't think that's nearly as good or nearly as effective as the public option that I'm supporting. But we can't rule it out because we got to win. At the end of the day, I'm working around the clock to try to convince members of the House to vote for this public option. So I think it's right. And when we pass our bill, we're going to work hard to try to convince Senate to do the same thing. And that's the effort right now.
But Congressman Andrews, I want to talk about the politics of that a little bit, because if you say you're open to different ideas and the other side says we're not open to different ideas, it has to be this way, then aren't they going to win? Because
no, first of all, the Republicans have said that, and with all due respect to them, most of them have dealt themselves out of this negotiation. I'm not talking about Republicans here. I'm talking about Democrats who are presently unwilling to get on board this effort. Now, I want them aboard this effort, and I'm willing to listen and work with them and find reasonable ideas. I want a chance to convince them that our idea is right, because I think it is. One of the things that we're enjoying about this right now, to be honest with you, is many of the members that are reluctant to embrace a public option also want a bill that costs less. Well, the Congressional Budget Office came out today and said that a strong public option saves about $110 billion. $110 billion with a B. So if you want a lower cost bill, this is the way to do it. So you got to choose. We're saying to them, look, fellas, you got to choose.
But Congressman Andrews, doesn't that open up the question of, wait a minute now, if they're not really about fiscal discipline, if they were, they would obviously see that that's very positive. They should be in favor of the public option, as we discussed earlier. Doesn't it open up the question of that they're actually doing this for corporate money, and then how do you deal with that question?
I'm not going to question anybody's motives. I've known most of these people for a long, long time, and I think most of them, if not all of them, are sincerely motivated by what they think is right. and we're trying to change their minds. Those that are not with the program, we want to try to get them with the program.
Yeah, I happen to disagree. I'll be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
I think corporate donations makes an enormous difference for politicians. It's logical. They're the guys who pay them. So as a person who's covering this story, of course you have to question their motivation.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know, and you guys are in a tough spot because you're in the same party, but I don't know how you get beyond that spot if they hold their ground. So let me ask one last question related to healthcare reform here, and that's the Medicare rates. Another thing that they have put their foot down is also counterintuitive, where they say we don't want to hold the rates for a public option, if there is one, to Medicare rates. We want the doctors and the providers to get paid more, but then again, that would hurt fiscal discipline, wouldn't it?
It sure would, and the irony of their position is that they want fiscal discipline until it affects someone they like, in which case they don't want fixed fiscal discipline. Look, I think that we ought to have a public option tied to Medicare rates, because I think that's the strongest competition for the private insurance industry. And the retort to that is, well, hospitals and doctors don't make enough money off of Medicare rates. Really? Name me a hospital in your area that doesn't take Medicare patients. Name me a doctor in your area that doesn't see Medicare patients. Now, there are a few, but not many. So all over the country, hospitals say that Medicare doesn't pay them enough, but I notice that all over the country they still take Medicare patients. So I think we should base this on the Medicare rates.
We're talking to Congressman Robert Andrews from New Jersey. Congressman, we get emails all the time. I got one today from doctors saying, hey, the great thing about Medicare is they actually pay.
Yeah.
Whereas with private companies, you have to beg, plead, and to get them to pay for treatment that their patients desperately need. So that's a whole other issue. But on the efficacy of that, or whether it's going to work, I should say, where do you think we stand now in Congress? Do you think that the idea of Medicare, holding them to Medicare rates, is going to pass as part of the final House bill?
I think it will. It's up in the air. We had a very long meeting in the House Democrats this afternoon about this. And most people who spoke in favor of the Medicare rates, our position. Not everybody did. And I think that's a close one, but we're pushing to try to make sure it is based on Medicare rates, because that's the way you save the most money. And this is not my opinion. The Congressional Budget Office, which is regarded around here as the honest broker, the honest scorekeeper, has said if you negotiate these rates, you save $25 billion. If you have them tied to Medicare rates, you save $110 billion. It's an $85 billion difference. And if for those who say they want the bill to cost less, the Treasury, this is the best way to do it.
All right, Congressman Andrews, we appreciate your answers on healthcare. Before I let you go, I made a pledge to ask everyone who did this, so I've got to ask you. You voted for the Military Commissions Act in 2006, and that took away some very important rights from the American people, and challenged even habeas corpus. Do you regret that vote now?
Yes, I certainly regret the fact it took away her habeas corpus, and I'm doing whatever I can to restore it.
All right, fair enough. There's an answer. Congressman Andrews from New Jersey, thank you for joining us.
Great talking to you.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We'll be right back. Young Turks. Back on the Young Turks. For those of you watching the show live, sorry we had a small technical issue. We're going to go a little longer to try to make up some time for it. So we just had a conversation with Congressman Andrews from New Jersey on how the public option is doing in the House. I want to give you some of the updates that we alluded to in that interview, and some new ones as well. I just got breaking news on it as well. First, Rahm Emanuel said that he was skeptical about whether the Senate would include a public option in it, and he once again seemed to push for a trigger, which is what he's always been in favor of. He pushed for it several months ago. It got shot down because a lot of the progressives in the House and some in the Senate were not in favor of it at all. Certainly the progressive groups reacted very poorly to it. But of course, Rahm Emanuel didn't give up on that secret plan, and it looks like he continues to ram it through in his position at the White House. Now, of course, that's really bad news. But just again, as we explained in that interview a little bit, so you understand what the trigger is. The trigger is simply, let's come back and decide whether we want to do this 5 years later. I mean, there's no way they're going to have an automatic trigger that says, okay, if your premium is X, whose premium? You see what I'm saying? In which state? With which policy? And then it automatically goes into law? No way. They'd just come back and have this whole debate 5 years from now. It's a terrible idea. It's basically saying we're not doing it, but we're covering it with a very loose fig leaf that maybe we'll do it later. And that's what Rahm Emanuel's pushing. And he says, well, public option. Yeah, that sounds lovely, but the Senate's not going to do it. What can I do? Well, that leads us to our breaking news. So the Senate Finance Committee, after deliberating on this for an endless period of time, tomorrow will finally actually have a vote on the public option. Not the whole Senate, just the Finance Committee. So now one of the senators, important senator, a guy who's been really doing a great job on this issue, to be honest with you, Senator Rockefeller from West Virginia, said, don't count out the public option. You never know how that vote goes. Now, that sounds a little too optimistic for me because some of the senators are going to have a change of heart? That's not how they usually react. It's not like, in a little bit we're going to play you a clip of John Kyle and Max Baucus in a fight on the floor, but not a literal fight, but a fight of words. And it's John Kyle's giving the speech as if he's going to convince people. Really? They're going to listen to your speech and be like, wait a minute, I hadn't thought of that, Senator Kyle. That's a good point. That's not really how the Senate works. But to be fair now, Conrad and Baucus are not completely clear on the record. I don't think they've ever said, I will not vote for a public option. They usually like the euphemism of, a public option cannot pass, so what can I do? So now, what's great about this, even if it fails, is they get put to a vote. So what are you going to do, Senator Conrad? What are you going to do, Senator Baucus? Are you going to violate the trust of your voters, the Democratic voters that elected you, and side with the corporations and the lobbyists? Or are you going to get this thing done? So the other thing that gives me slight hope here is Chuck Schumer, who's also been very strong and surprisingly strong in favor of the public option. But the reason it gives me hope is, one, he's a very shrewd politician. So if he's on our side on this, that's a really good thing. Number two, he's not a guy who's overly optimistic about things. He has a very good sense of what's realistic, generally speaking, almost too good a sense. Like he'll give up on things that I think are doable, in my experience, because he'll consider them not realistic. Get a load of this quote from Schumer. I'd like to make a prediction. The health care bill that will be signed into law by the president will have a good, strong, robust public option. That's a bold prediction by Schumer. And against my better judgment, I'm a little encouraged by that. So some really good news. Bad news from Rahm, good news from the Senate, especially from Schumer. Now we go to the House. So the White House, the Senate, now the House of Representatives, the third branch. And there, again, good news. There's been a real battle. The Blue Dogs and the Progressives have butted heads here. And here the question is, who's going to hold stronger? So if one group says, look, we're going to do this bill this way, and that's why I disagreed with Congressman Andrews, if you noticed, during that debate. One group says, we're going to do it this way and we're not going to bend. That's the group that usually wins. Okay? If the other says, we might bend, that means they will bend, right? 9 out of 10 times. In this rare case, the Blue Dogs are wavering. They just what they did was they had they whipped the vote, which means they went and actually counted the votes. How many people are actually going to vote against the bill if it has a public option in it, right? And Nancy Pelosi was very confident, saying, I'm going to grab 20 Blue Dogs to vote in favor of the public option. So the Blue Dogs got together in a panic, and they're like, wait, who's voting how, right? And they found out, Nancy Pelosi's pretty close to right. And that a lot of them are going to go ahead and vote for the public option. And when you go to the progressive side, they're like, public option or bust. And that is another ray of hope. Even if you lose this fight altogether in the end, there are real progressives in the House of Representatives. Breaking news, real progressives. And that is a ray of hope that this country is going to stop sliding to the right endlessly, right? And let me point out one guy who's been terrific. Now, Anthony Weiner's been great in the media, coming out and making forceful arguments, presenting his case. A guy who doesn't get talked about a lot, but who's been great in actually pulling the progressives together is Congressman Grijalva. And he is one of the co-chairs of the Progressive Caucus. And he's been a real hero in bringing guys together and keeping them strong. And he said again today, look, we're not just talking about a bill that gets out of the House. It's got to get out of committee, and it's got to go to the president to sign, and it's got to have a public option in. Grijalva! Mount up, soldiers! Little ray of hope, little ray of hope. It doesn't mean it's going to get done, but that's nice and strong. One other thing, Jane Harman, is a blue dog here from California. And she's done a lot of questionable things in the past, including going along with Bush's torture program. She will protest and say, no, she didn't, but it certainly looked bad, right? And we have some devastating quotes on that. Anyway, look, get a load of her. She says, look, I know that Woolsey, another person who's been very strong on this, on the progressive side, is going to come and talk to me after I'm done with this interview, she told a reporter. And she's going to ask me if I'm still in favor of the public option and if I'm going to cave in on it. And I'm telling you right here on the record, and then she pulls Woolsey aside, puts her arm around and says, I am with you on the public option, and I will not cave. Uh-oh. I mean, that's the worst thing. Any of you play fantasy football? Okay, if you do, you know. Like, you got a game that's kind of hopeless. It's a little out. Any sports fan could relate to this, even if you don't play fantasy football, but it's definitely true in that area. You got a game you know you're going to lose, but then one of your players starts doing well, and you begin to hope. You're like, is it possible that I could mount an improbable comeback? And that's the worst thing of all, that false hope. Now, let's hope that it's not false hope in this case. You see, I definitely keep an open mind on it, and I would, man, if Schumer's right and Gitter Halva's right and Woolsey's right, and they wind up getting this thing done, no matter how badly Rahm Emanuel wants to kill it, wow, that would be a sea change in American politics. And that would be fantastic, and it would be close to the change that we've been looking for and the one we thought we voted for. One bad piece of news from the Senate, when they asked Senator Ben Nelson earlier, you had said to supporters that you would make sure that you did not join a Republican filibuster of this bill, no matter how you're going to vote for it. Do you still stick to that? His office said, nah, maybe yes, maybe no. Okay, so all of a sudden he's wavering on that, meaning he might join a Republican filibuster of this health care bill, which would be disastrous. But you know, sometimes politicians do that to get a better bribe. They say, well, I could join the Republicans in a filibuster unless you give Nebraska an extra couple of billion on some other project that I want, and I got a friend who's involved in it. And that's politics, you know, and you got to play politics to some degree, but we'll keep an eye on that and tell you how it goes. Let me do one clip here before we let you go in this segment. I mentioned let's do the Kyle clip because I mentioned it earlier. Clip number 7. Here's where they're going to get into a fight. Kyle is a Republican from Arizona. Baucus, of course, Democrat from North Dakota and Montana. And they're going to get into a little fight here, and I just want to make one comment on that after we listen. Clip number 7.
As I pointed out in my opening statement, what we believe in is a targeted approach. We have a problem of too much cost. Let's target some solutions to that. I'll just note one example I gave. Insurance costs too much. Healthcare costs too much. Let's see if we can reduce the cost. What's one of the cost drivers? Well, I pointed out a study that said that $100 billion. Mr. Chairman, let me just complete my thought here.
In about 1 minute, you'll complete your thought. Okay, we got to.
I'll complete my thought and then make another point, Mr. Chairman.
This is your delaying, Senator, and we just have to move on.
Mr. Chairman, I am not delaying. I'm making an extremely important point.
It's a very, very important point, but you're also delaying. So let's. Other senators have amendments they wish to offer. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. You'll complete your thought. Then I'm going to have to recognize the other senator. In deference to and courtesy. To be courteous, other senators will also.
Mr. Chairman, it's courteous if you don't interrupt somebody right in the middle of the sentence of an important point they're trying to make. I have not dominated this discussion. I have not filibustered in this markup that we've been having. I think that everything I've said has been directly on point. I'm responding directly to a point that you made, and I'll try to restate the point that I was trying to make before I was interrupted, which is that if our object here is to try to reduce the cost of health care, Republicans believe we should directly target solutions to that. What's one of the big cost drivers? Malpractice. We know that by one of the studies I cited, $100 billion a year could be saved with good medical malpractice reform.
All right, that's one of my pet peeves, is how long people take in arguing about whether they're taking too long, right? If you just let me finish, go ahead and finish. Well, let me finish, go ahead and finish. Just make your point and move on already. But Baucus is right. Why? You think Kyle thinks that he's going to convince the other senators? Oh, you know what? I was going to vote for healthcare reform. But Kyle made a really good point there about, malpractice. Okay, you win, Kyle. Touche, nicely done. I vote your way. No, the reason he keeps going on and on and on, and the reason Baucus has to interrupt him is because they are de facto filibustering things to slow things down, to make sure things get accomplished at a slower pace so that hopefully it grinds to a halt eventually and makes it less likely that it passes. So every time they go to a Republican, they talk and talk and talk about things that's never going to win. And they know is never going to win. And they're at best just grandstanding, at worst filibustering. And then Kyle says, I'm not filibustering this process. Well, we got you on the record now, Kyle. So you're not going to filibuster anything, right, including the vote? Yeah, probably not, right? You're going to go ahead and filibuster it. You do it with your mouth, and you'll do it with your vote eventually. All right, we'll be right back. Young Turks.